When Battle Princess of Arcadias was released in Japan, it came out of friggin' nowhere. Seriously, I didn't hear a single thing about this game until it came out, and even after it came out, I barely heard anything about it. But just from the title alone and some of the character designs, I was really hoping that this game would get a US release, and luckily enough, it just did. However, while the original Japanese release was a full-price $60 boxed release, the US one is a $30 PSN-only download with Japanese audio only. In short, a quick and cheap translation that Nipponichi probably only did because they published it in Japan, so I guess they probably had the US publishing rights as well, and figured they could make back whatever money they spent on it and maybe make a little bit more off of it. The game does come from a company called Apollo Soft, which according to GameFAQs only made 3 games. This is their 3rd, so you do kinda gotta cut them a little bit of slack. The game itself looks like a low-rent version of Odin Sphere, which is half the reason why I was interested in it, which probably has you wondering, why would you want to play a low-rent Odin Sphere? Wouldn't you just, go off and play Dragon's Crown? Well, yes, except, number 1, I already did that, and number 2, I gotta applaud the effort. The game very clearly wears its inspiration on its sleeve. It's obvious that Battle Princess of Arcadias was inspired by Odin Sphere and Princess Crown. However, whenever a company looks at what Vanillaware does and goes, yeah, I want to try my hand at doing that too, I want to put my own spin on that, I can't help but applaud that and want to support such a thing. I will say, Battle Princess of Arcadias definitely doesn't look as good as Odin Sphere, obviously. Just from looking at this, you can tell they use a lot of sprite rotation, and the individual frames of animation, when they do use them, don't really blend together too well. In many ways, it looks like a cheap Flash game, really only saved because of the sheer amount of color and detail on the sprites. However, I have to say, what it lacks in quality, it makes up for in quantity. The game has a whopping 10 different playable characters, and you get to choose 3 to take with you on a mission and switch between them on the fly. It also has far more environments than Odin Sphere did. Much like Odin Sphere, the game is a stage-based hack-and-slash, kinda sorta an RPG, but not really, but it has heavy RPG elements and lengthy cutscenes kind of thing. However, while Odin Sphere was all about slow, methodical combat, this game is very much about the spamming a whole ton of enemies at you and wanting you to mash buttons to hack and slash your way through them. However, in spite of the sheer number of enemies this game likes to throw on screen, it does maintain a perfectly smooth 60 FPS throughout without any slowdown or frame rate drops. Thankfully, the characters do have decently sized movesets, and as they level up, they even earn command moves, and the controls are fast and responsive, much more so than Odin Sphere, in fact. The only complaint I have with the controls is the lack of jump canceling. You see, when you complete a combo, you'll probably want to jump up and try to attack the enemies in the air, but your jump won't actually work. This is because you're still in recovery from doing the last swing of your combo, which feels a little awkward at first, but you do get used to it. And looking into the game more, this was actually a very intentional design decision. Later on, you can get an item that lets you dash cancel out of combos, and apparently a couple attacks in the game are actually jump cancelable. But still, it does feel a little weird, like your jump button doesn't quite work, which again is extra odd because the controls are generally so tight and responsive. You can even get double jumps on the character, and you can air recover. So yeah, the lack of jump canceling throughout most of your combo really does feel a bit odd. You can also bounce enemies off walls and juggle them. Don't expect anything too fighting gamey, but the combat has just enough meat to it that it's not completely 100% mindless. But yes, it is more about crowd control than anything else, almost like a 2D side-scrolling Dynasty Warriors. The other thing that feels awkward is the fact that commanding your troops is actually a distinct action, so you can't command your troops while you're in mid-air or in the middle of a combo. Command your troops, you say? Well, yeah, you see, the hack and slash just beat up a whole bunch of enemies stages are only one of 3 different stage types in the game. You also have sieges and skirmishes. In sieges, you and an army take on a giant monster, your goal being to deplete their defense meter so that way you can actually deal damage to them. And while you do this, you command an army of troops, which help you deplete that defense gauge and take out its health. However, on the flip side, if your army of 150 troops are taken out by the monster, you automatically lose whether or not your character has HP left. Skirmishes are much the same way. Once again, you're commanding an army of troops, but this time you choose from a variety of different troop types. These troops then fight in the background, sort of rock, paper, scissors style, with different strengths and weaknesses against other troop types, while you fight in the front against various swarms of enemies. As you beat up enemies, it fills your morale gauge, which you use to command your troops, and if you manage to completely fill your morale gauge, you can do a super move. However, once again, if you run out of troops in your army, you automatically lose whether or not you have HP left. In many ways, the game does not play by the rules, and this is definitely going to give it an unfair reputation as being a grind fest, when in reality, grinding isn't really going to help you unless you grind a whole lot and completely break the game, which, like many RPGs, is completely possible. I did it with this guy named Hevelke here, who is really quite an awesome character. Much of the time, you just have to adopt a different strategy or figure out what you're doing wrong beyond the basics of combat. And that can occasionally take more thinking than you might realize. You have to strategize, but not in a typical strategy game way. One particular battle was annoying because there was sort of a boss general which kept spamming electro balls at me and blocked all of my attacks. Because I had so much difficulty taking out this general, more enemy troops wouldn't spawn in the front so I could take them out to build my morale, thus preventing me from commanding my troops. I couldn't figure out what I needed to do to take out this rather difficult enemy until I realized, hey, wait a second, the guy with an axe has a throw move, which breaks guards. So, once I realized that, I used my main character to clear away the enemy units until only the boss was left, then have the guy with the axe grab her by the head and keep slamming her into the ground until she was defeated. Then, normal enemy troops would spawn in and I could treat it like a normal skirmish stage. That didn't require me to level up, that required me to think a little bit outside the box. Speaking of not playing by the rules, you also have the equipment system. Characters only have a weapon and accessory that they equip on themselves, which would make you think it would be easy to keep their equipment updated. However, surprisingly, money actually has value in this game. There is so much you can spend your money on in this game that even after I completely broke the game and was grinding on an overpowered siege boss with just my main character and telling everyone else to defend and being able to take it out in 25 hits, I still wound up spending more money than I had. Because there really is that much to spend money on. Upgrading your troops, upgrading your weapons, purchasing new equipment. It is actually kind of hard to keep your characters having the best gear. However, that really isn't important. You don't need to upgrade your gear that much. The gear is more of an addition that boosts your characters more than something you need to stay on top of, especially because the gear is handled in a weirdly Diablo-esque way with random names and statistics assigned to weapons, which occasionally leads to hilarious names like the Shake Spear, and my personal favorite, the Bloody Rainblood. That is the most 90s gun ever. And while we're on the topic of Diablo-style weapons and not playing by the rules, the weapons you actually purchase from the shop are, in this case, usually better than the ones that enemies drop. And enemies don't drop weapons all that frequently. On top of that, you have the bosses. The game actually does have legit one-on-one giant boss battles, but they don't show up until like stage 45 out of 50. They wait until the very end of the game to suddenly pull bosses out of nowhere at you. I seriously did not see that coming. And, yeah, while we're on the subject of, not playing by the rules, pro tip, do not skip Side Story 4. Because, you see, in order to use troops of a certain weapon type, you have to use a character that is of that weapon type. And the only way to get the gun character and use the gun troops, which will be very handy, is to complete Side Story 4, which is not only time sensitive, wherein if you progress too far in the plot, the mission will go away. But yeah, if you don't do that mission, you do not get Marianne on your team, you do not get someone who can use guns, and you do not get gun troops. You would think that the one missable character in the game would at least be one of the ones that you have duplicates of. You have 2 mages in the game, you have 2 spear users in the game, and you have 2 sword users in the game. You would really think one of the sword users would be the hidden one, or the mage or something, but no, it's the one and only gun user in the entire game. That's the semi-hidden character, so pro tip on that one. Really, if this game has one major flaw, aside from some minor control hiccups and whatnot, it would be the lack of information. The tutorials are very brief and don't really explain what you need to do very well, and they're mostly just for, skirmishes and sieges. And in fact, there's a very good chance that you will lose these missions, causing you to scratch your head and try to figure out what the heck it was you did wrong. And if you don't lose those missions, the first real skirmish and siege after the training missions, you certainly will.
Thankfully, the game is quite forgiving. Should you happen to lose in a stage, you actually keep all of your experience and levels that you earned, and you're just booted back to the map screen and can try again. So you can actually keep replaying the same stage over and over again until you clear it, and it isn't a complete waste of time, which honestly is my preferred way of handling difficulty. I really like super short, super hard stages that there isn't really any major penalty when you lose, which excuses them being ridiculously hard.
There's actually a number of subsystems and mechanics in this game that aren't really told to you or explained outright. You sort of have to look in the margins of the game's explanations, like when you're in a skirmish, if you use a character that uses the same weapon type as the troops, your morale builds faster. They only tell you this when you're at the barracks leveling up your troops, which they never specifically tell you to go to the barracks and level up your troops. And they don't explain the weapon upgrading system at all, which is at the core of the game. You see, each weapon can be upgraded a limited number of times by combining some of the random items that enemies drop with the weapons, which in turn boost various stats on them. The game does not tell you anything about this, and you have to experiment. If you're looking into playing Battle Princess of Arcadias, I hope you like experimentation and aren't afraid to go on without a manual. I looked in the digital manual, it really doesn't explain a whole lot. But you can certainly bumble your way through it. I guess the only thing I haven't covered really is the story, which is lighthearted and silly, though it does have some darker, more dramatic elements in the background. I will say that the ending of the game feels rushed. I actually thought I was only halfway through the game when I wound up actually being like 3 stages from the end of it. They set up many surprise twists and leave you asking a whole lot of questions, and then some of them are just left hanging, aren't really paid off. Maybe I had to do a side story to find out more about them. But it really does kind of feel like the ending of the game is rushed. The game has a whole lot of talking in it, and it can be a little on the bland side. However, it definitely has its shining moments. The characters are very one-dimensional, but that lends itself well to humor, as they are all incredibly over the top. My personal favorite would be Havelke, who I mentioned is an awesome character that you can completely break the game with due to his incredibly high attack speed, and he speaks entirely in melodrama that has to be translated by your Squire Ralts.
暗黒が支配する庭を望んでも世界は俺に笑いかけてはくれない。グングニルの槍を手に地獄の釜に立ち向かうといい。勝利をこの手に。地獄の釜は3の海。白き悪魔の存在も見過ごしてはならない。
Overall, I don't don't really want to get too into the specifics of the story. I mean, basically, you're in a land called Vertex, you're the Battle Princess, your brother is a king who got turned into a goose, but he doesn't care, and you're supposed to go out there and fight evil. And then there's apparently J-pop music that plays during sieges that can control people's minds. Again, I don't want to get too far into it because that will spoil some of the game's plot twists. But it's an okay plot, nothing too terribly amazing. If nothing else, the characters are fun. As I mentioned earlier, the game is 50 stages long, not counting the post-game content, and should last you about 20-ish hours. So in conclusion, the game isn't great, but it's certainly not bad. In short, it's gonna be receiving the Gel Special, that's right, the good old-fashioned 3.5 out of 5. Look, this game is far from bad, and in many ways was incredibly enjoyable. I very much liked playing through it and felt that it was $30 well spent. But it's not something I would recommend to everyone. It's a lot of a niche game, and it's not the most amazing niche game ever. It's pretty much okay, but does enough different and interesting that it's above average. In short, if you look at this review and this game and you go, wow, that looks really interesting, I want to try that, then I do recommend it, because it's definitely not a bad game, and there's a very good chance that if it looks interesting to you, you'll enjoy it. However, if you're looking for a super polished, well-made, finely crafted game, you might want to look elsewhere. This game comes from Apollosoft, a company that has made a grand total of 3 games, with this being their 3rd according to GameFAQs, and it definitely feels like it. But they're on the right track. If I had to give them any suggestions, I'd say try to combine the battles and the skirmishes from this game and the sieges into a more cohesive and quicker battle style and make an action strategy game out of that. That is something I'd be really interested in. But this isn't about the games that don't exist, this is about the game that does exist. Battle Princess of Arcadias gets a 3.5 out of 5, and I say, if it looks interesting to you, go for it. Oh, and one more thing. The game opens with a fight against Groudon. There are baby Articunos, and your squire is literally a Ralts. Hoenn confirmed. Anyway, this is Gel, and you've been GameBabbled. See ya.